The Sunday school lesson for October 5th, 2025 is God warns Pharaoh through dreams. Genesis chapter 41, verses 25 through 36. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, The Backstory and More. I am Audrey. If you are new here, please know that this is an audio reading of the lesson. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so at this time. And thank you so much in advance for all that you do to help this channel grow one viewer and one subscriber at a time. Introduction. Ancient Egyptians believed that dreams were one of the primary ways their gods communicated with them. Not every dream was considered significant, but as we see in Joseph's story, when people sensed a supernatural element in a dream, they sought its meaning. Dream interpretation was such a big deal that the Egyptians compiled books for deciphering the meaning of each dream component. The clearest evidence we have of Egyptian dream interpretation is found in an ancient document called Papyrus Chester Beatty III. The papyrus is dated to the 13th century BC, but was possibly copied from an earlier time period. The document contains a list of dream components, labeling each one as good or bad, along with suggested meanings. In Genesis 41, however, the best of Pharaoh's advisors had no idea how to interpret his dreams. That is when the cupbearer remembered Joseph. God's revelation, Genesis chapter 41, verses 25 through 32. Famine foretold, Genesis chapter 41, verses 25 through 27. Joseph made it clear to Pharaoh that his dream had not come from one of the Egyptian gods, but from the one and only God, capital G-O-D. Further, the two dreams were really one dream because they had the same meaning, and God had sent it to reveal something about his plans for Egypt's immediate future. Pharaoh's dream involved two sets of 7 kine or cows and two sets of 7 ears of wheat. In each case, the first set was plump and the second set thin, and the second set consumed the first without getting any plumper. Pharaoh called the plump ears of wheat good and the thin cows poor, literally bad or evil. In light of the ancient Egyptian tendency to label different elements of dreams either good or bad, these descriptions may include that Pharaoh recognized the first sets as good omens and the second sets as bad omens. But beyond that, he did not know what they meant. Joseph explained first that the sets of 7 each represented 7 years. Since the two dreams were really one doubled dream, that meant the cows and wheat ears represented the same two 7-year stretches. The good sets of cows and wheat represented 7 productive years for the land. The bad sets represented 7 years of famine. Famine foretold a second time. Genesis chapter 41, verses 28 through 31. Joseph then repeated the interpretation to Pharaoh, using nearly identical language as in verse 25 to re-emphasize that God had revealed to Pharaoh something he was going to do very soon in Egypt. The famine would not result from the Egyptian fertility gods withdrawing their favor, as Pharaoh might otherwise have presumed, but from God's intervention. In the second telling of the interpretation, Joseph provided more detail. First, he revealed the geographical extent of the years of plenty. It would extend across the entire land of Egypt. Second, he revealed the extent of the famine's devastation. The prior years of plenty would be forgotten. The famine would consume or destroy the land. It would make the years of plenty unknown, removing every shred of evidence that the land had ever produced abundantly. And it would be very grievous. Notice the emphasis Joseph placed on the land in this second telling of the interpretation, repeating the term 4 times in 3 verses. Sometimes land is translated as earth or ground, depending on context, is a prominent theme in Genesis. God created and filled the earth, commissioned Adam and Eve to have dominion over the earth, but then cursed the ground, different word, but similar concept, because of Adam's sin, and had to destroy the earth because of rampant wickedness. Throughout Genesis, we see God's plan unfold to restore the land to its original purpose. He promised never again to destroy the whole earth by water, and promised to give Abraham's descendants a land that would become the focal point of his redemptive work. Receiving abundance from the earth was a sign of God's blessing, and receiving little from the earth was a sign of the removal of God's blessing. Even though the land in view in chapter 41 is primarily Egypt, not the promised land, Pharaoh's dream highlighted the land's continuing struggle to survive and produced under sin's curse. Doubling down, Genesis 41, verse 32. A lot of things occur in pairs in Genesis chapter 41. 2 years passed. Pharaoh had 2 dreams. Pharaoh's dream was recounted twice, and Joseph gave its interpretation twice. All of that doubling culminated in verse 32, where Joseph revealed that the doubling of Pharaoh's dream indicated the certainty and immediacy of what God was about to do. Joseph's wisdom, Genesis chapter 41, verses 33 through 36. Overseers for the land, Genesis chapter 41, verses 33 through 34a. In verses 33 through 36, the theme of land continues, with the term occurring 6 times in those 4 verses. Now, however, instead of issuing a warning, Joseph proposed a plan that would spare the land from its coming devastation. That proposal involved 2 steps. First, Pharaoh would need to appoint numerous overseers, including a right-hand man he could set over the land of Egypt. To qualify for such vast responsibility, the second in command would need to be discreet and wise. There may be a hint of irony here, as Pharaoh's leading advisors were called wise in Genesis chapter 41, verse 8. But they could not even tell Pharaoh the meaning of his dream, let alone come up with its solution. Pharaoh would quickly recognize Joseph as the clear choice for the job. Preservation of the land, Genesis chapter 41, verses 34b through 36. Joseph recommended that Pharaoh appoint officers or overseers throughout the land of Egypt. The overseer's job would be to collect a portion of the land's abundance in the first 7 years, store it away, and guard it until the 7 years of famine came. The phrase, take up the 5th part of the land, requires further explanation. Some think this means that the overseers would take 1/5 of the land's grain as a tax during the 7 abundant years, while others think it is an idiom that refers more generally to organizing the land's crops. These different interpretations arise because the verb translated as take up the 5th part is the verbal form of the number 5, but it is also sometimes used to military context to refer to the organization of ranks. This difficulty with the first interpretation is that it seems unlikely 1/5 of the grain from the first 7 years would be enough to feed both Egypt and all the surrounding nations for the next 7 years. It also seems to conflict with the directive to collect all the food of the good years in verse 35. The difficulty with the second interpretation is that Genesis 41 is not a military context. Although arguments could be made for either interpretation, a possible solution to the dilemma is that here the term means not to take 1/5, but to divide into 5 parts, which would fit with the meanings sometimes associated with verbal forms of other numbers. In that case, the verse may indicate that whatever grain the overseers gathered would be divided between 5 locations or store cities. Joseph emphasized that the goal was for the land not to perish, literally be cut off, due to the famine. Joseph's wise response would save Egypt and the surrounding nations. That included Joseph's own family in Canaan. Through Joseph's enslavement and imprisonment, God had prepared a way for his chosen family, and thus the lineage of the coming Savior, to survive. Thank you so very much for listening. Stay safe and may God bless.